Thank you for listening to Agreeable Disagreements. And I know that this is the beginning of the podcast and a really weird place for me to say thank you, but I wanted to take this moment because we don't get ads. We don't broadcast this a whole lot, but we know that we get a good amount of dedicated listeners. And I want you to know that we know you, we wish we saw more of you, but we also know you wish you saw more of us. This episode ran super long, and there's some really interesting stuff about my personal views with politics that we decided to ultimately cut out. However, we will be giving that to you as a bonus episode the day after we air this episode of the podcast. So if you're listening to this the day it comes out, then check back tomorrow. And if you're listening to this after the day it comes out, you can go listen to that bonus episode right now. It's only about 10, 15 minutes long, and I think you might get some interesting insights. Anyway, you're awesome. Thank you.
So I just very recently, within last hour or so, finished reading Patrick Stewart's memoir, and it was fantastic. Isn't it called
like Make It So?
It's called Make It So, which is a reference to, that's a classic Jean-Luc Picard line. But I have been a lifelong Star Trek fan, especially the Next Generation. So this was... So I read a lot of memoirs.
Sure.
Especially of, celebrities, comedians mostly, but celebrities that I have some kind of parasocial connection with. This has by far been the best one. It was such a phenomenal book and such a just gave me a lot of new insight on an actor that I've loved my entire life, but had never really known a lot about, and his life intersects with so many different not comedians, but other celebrities and actors. And
when you're Patrick freaking Stewart, of course.
Patrick freaking
Stewart. You're absolutely right. How dare I forget his order?
His honorific.
Honorific, that's the word.
Or is that what emoluments are? Is that like the whole emoluments thing where giving people titles of nobility?
No. An emolument or emoluments is just a salary, fee, or profit from employment or office.
Oh, okay. Wasn't there a thing though about Trump violating the emoluments clause by wanting to knight his children or something?
I don't know.
Or maybe that was just about having his children work for him.
That might be. It might be working for him. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't know about knighting. That's not something we do.
Yeah, no, but do you think that would matter to him?
Maybe.
Be oh, now that you're the president, you can give your children these titles of nobility. Do you think that would at all disinterest him?
You're the best. You're the best knight in shining armor ever.
I hereby grant you Duke of Hoboken. Anyway, let's move on to our topic.
Yes. So, obviously, there's been a lot of stuff going on in the news since we were last able to sit down and record.
Which has I apologize.
Been a while. Well,
I've been sick.
It wasn't just that. First, we were going to sit down and record, and the day that we were set to do that, they ousted Senator McCarthy, or Representative McCarthy, whatever it is. They ousted the Speaker of the House for the first time in American history. And we were like, oh, well, let's pause and see if it goes anywhere. And then it kind of didn't go anywhere. So we were like, okay, let's record. And then you got sick.
Yes.
And we still haven't gotten an answer or resolution
on either
Speaker
one
of the House. So we're going to talk about the Speaker of the House controversy today, actually. And we also want to talk about the Arab-Israeli conflict. And again,
we're going to fix the Arab-Israeli conflict.
Yeah, we are going to fix
right
a conflict
here.
that is
You heard
decades older than
you
we
heard
are.
it here, folks.
Oh my gosh!
For the first time in almost a century, actually, well, 3/4 of a century. Can we give us that? We're going to fix the Arab-Israeli conflict.
Okay. I just want to remind us real quick.
Benjamin Netanyahu, get at me. I got the answers for you, bud.
Oh, you're going to kill me. All right. I just want to remind the listeners that we are not a news show, so don't listen to this as fact reporting. This is us saying, hey, these are current events. There's multiple ways to view and interpret what's going on with these events. We've talked a little bit about both of these things, and there's some things that we agree on. I will be interested to see how it goes with the things we don't agree on.
Well, so I think based on our preliminary conversations, I think that our thinking is more or less in the same direction. But there are definitely some areas where we differ on the specifics, which I think is kind of true of, or more or less true of a lot of the topics that we talk about. But I'm also interested to hear exactly where we disagree on this one.
Yeah. Okay. So really quick, for anybody who doesn't know about the background, I feel like at this point, most people who are listening know what's currently going on, that these tensions between Hamas and Israel have reignited. And there's fighting now going on both sides. There's launches going on in each direction. It started this time around with Hamas conflict. They...
See, I'm going to disagree with you here.
Okay.
I think that Israel, for the last year, maybe 2 years, has been kind of poking the bear.
That's fair.
And keep poking the Palestinian population. And I think this is my first point that I want to make. Hamas is not Palestine.
Correct.
Hamas does not represent Palestine. Hamas claims to be, Palestinian. They're also the ruling body within the Gaza Strip. But I want to make it very clear that when we talk about Hamas, when we talk about Hezbollah, and when we talk about Palestine, we're talking about three very distinct, different organizations.
Right. And Palestine has specifically spoken out against Hamas, even though when they posted that, it got taken down later. But they have spoken out and said Hamas does not represent Palestine or what we are.
Right. Which I think is the biggest differentiation, because when you talk about the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, when you talk about Israeli organizations, what you are talking about are government-sanctioned organizations.
Right. Now,
and what I didn't want to detract from your original point, but
how dare you?
I just wanted to make sure that the vocabulary that we're using is understood.
I agree. Yeah, that's a good clarification to make. I think, though, the poking the bear, as you said, goes both ways. Because,
certainly,
yes, Israel has been kind of poking that bear on the Gaza Strip, but, Hamas has been regularly launching rockets.
Yes, but Hamas is a terrorist organization.
Right.
Israel is a government. And so for the last year, they've really been fairly brutal in their treatment of Palestinians. And so to say that this most recent attack, I think it was about a week ago, by Hamas is the start of this is not factual. I think that is more you could go back to 1947 to the creation of Israel. You could go back further than that, I'm sure, to the maybe even to the separation of, I think it was Isaac and Ishmael, the sons of Abraham.
Yeah.
founding the Israelites and then what later became the
The Arabs.
Muslims.
You're
But
right, but we got to put a deadline on it somewhere. And I think
yeah,
this specific conflict goes back to 1947, when after the Holocaust, Israel, Hebrews, Jewish people around the world were looking to kind of regather themselves, and they kind of went back to their homeland. And the United Nations helped them set aside a certain amount of land in what is now Israel as their homeland.
Which I think is an interesting concept for you and I, because you and I both belong to religions that are that hold a concept of Zion,
right?
Which, from my understanding, the the Jews that think that, or that hold Israel to be their homeland, consider that to be Zion.
Yeah. Whereas, I don't know your specific religion, but for us, Zion is more of a state of being than it is.
Yeah, it's more of a concept for us.
Right. Yeah. It's not a specific place, although it could be a specific place. It's more like, hey, we've achieved a certain level, or we're the goal of membership and spread around. It's a state of how everybody's living their lives, kind of a thing.
I think I likened it in a previous podcast to the representation of Star Trek, or of Earth in Star Trek: The Next Generation, where,
which is interesting because that's what I used to explain Marxist communism versus real communism.
Well,
that same example.
But that is kind of the vision of Zion that I envision. It's, there's no war. Your well-being isn't tied to your financial, ability. There's no famine. There's relatively no disease. That kind of thing.
Anyway, so the Israelis view their homeland as a sort of Zion, and they go back, but a lot of the land is kind of split between them and the Arab-descended Palestinians. There's this builds in tensions until something called the 6 Days War, where Israel basically reclaims a good chunk of that land, and essentially, not quite, the borders evolve a bit more up until 2005 even, but essentially we're left with pretty close to the borders that we see today between Palestine and the Gaza Strip. And more or less, Palestine and Israel are able to figure their crap out and kind of coexist. I'm not going to say get along.
Yeah.
And the key words here being more or less.
Yeah. That's definitely, there's a lot of loaded stuff behind that, more or less, but
they're neighbors that do not like each other but realize that they have to live next to each other, and they get on each other's nerves a lot. They blow each other up fairly often, but it's not as bad as the Gaza Strip. Now, the Gaza Strip is a group of Palestinians who were basically, Israel was trying to colonize that land and trying to put Israelite or Hebrew people in that land, and it was creating a lot of conflict. And the resolution that the UN helped them come to was Israel would withdraw, and that land would be under Israel's government, but have their own self-governance.
Yeah, a little bit of sovereignty. And from my understanding, that is... so that governing body of, Palestinian sympathetic people, that's Hamas. And they started, I believe, as an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, who, listeners might remember from the Arab Spring, when I think it was Hosni Mubarak was deposed as the leader of Egypt, and the Muslim Brotherhood came in and created a new Egyptian government, and there have been a lot of things, from that. But Hamas and Muslim Brotherhood, who I think we were supporting in the Arab Spring, they split off from the same origins back in like the mid-70s, but are very much classified as a terrorist organization. Now, that's different than Hezbollah, which are Lebanese Palestinian sympathetic people who primarily operate out of the West Bank of the Jordan River, like the west or eastern side of Jerusalem, but the West Bank of the River Jordan.
Right. And it's also, man, there's so much going on with it. Like, we could sit here and explain for a couple of hours what this conflict is, but essentially, as you
Surprise,
mentioned,
we're not going to fix this, listeners.
Right. Well, and since 2005, Israel has had the Gaza Strip sort of under siege, where they don't really let a whole lot get in. They do let refugees get out if they want to, but they don't let resources in. And so you've got a lot of people who are, I think, rightfully upset at that siege. It's not too dissimilar from what we did to Cuba. That's why Cuba.
Well, that's what I was going to bring up was, you know, technically, if you immigrate from Cuba and you can make it here, you're granted asylum.
Right.
Look at, you know, as far back as like the early 90s with Elian Gonzalez, how hard that actually is to manifest.
Right.
I think is, you know, obviously you don't have the water barrier that you do with Cuba, but just because you are officially granted asylum or refugee status doesn't always make it so that is the case.
Right. And it's tough because on one hand, what are they supposed to do? Just let the terrorist organization do whatever they want? And on the other hand, there's, 48% of the population of the Gaza Strip are children.
Yeah.
So
and not at all well, I mean, I think that's the thing is what is your obligation to protecting your citizenry, speaking, you know, from the position of the state of Israel, versus what is your moral obligation to humanity. And it's very difficult to, I mean, that's a fine line to tread. However, I think that, I think maybe for the sake of just this conversation, because again, I'm still recovering from being sick and we're not going to, you know, have a super long recording. Maybe let's focus on kind of what's been going on within the last week and less so the historical difference. But
so I think, go ahead. You said a but. You had a but. Go.
Just saying that it is not as if Hamas's attack was unprovoked. We as a nation have,
on one hand, yes.
we as a nation have a duty to support Israel because we've said that we would support Israel. We're also, you know, foundational in the formation of Israel. And an attack on Israel by Hamas should be condemned. However, the response, both by the Israeli government and by the U.S. government, and I believe also by, I know the UK committed at least one warship and I think one submarine to patrolling the Israeli coast.
We've got 2 carriers out there now.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But where were those carriers, you know, 6 months ago when Israel was going into the West Bank, pulling people out of their homes, you know, extrajudicially, essentially committing up to the line of genocide. You know, they didn't have systematic killings, but they did have systematic beatings and the at least unofficial targeting of Palestinian people. And we saw no response from our Western governments.
Let's hesitate to use that word genocide here, because they're not systematically eradicating people.
Well, I think that their response now to the entire blockading of primarily northern Gaza, not letting in any kind of shutting off food, water, electricity, and not letting in any kind of aid until their conditions are met. I would classify that as a genocide. That is a direct attack against a population of people within a specific ethnic group.
Well, yeah, but it's not because of their ethnicity. It's because of the government. It's because it's because of the terrorist organization.
Is it not because of their ethnicity, though?
I mean, maybe if you're looking at the West Bank, possibly you could argue that it's specifically because of their ethnicity, but Palestinians live outside of the West Bank fairly peacefully with the rest of Israel.
Yeah, but Gaza? I mean, what's the percentage of...
Gaza's controlled by terrorists.
Yes, that's true.
If Palestine,
but the people living there are not terrorists.
You're right, but let's say Canada was ruled suddenly by a terrorist organization. Okay, we would cut ties.
No, I think a better metaphor is all Americans being treated as if they were part of the KKK.
I guess
they are not representative of the rest of us.
Right, but let's say the KKK were to become in charge of our government, I would expect don't start. I would expect other countries to treat the country as a whole differently and say, if you want to leave, you can come. We're going to kind of block off until, our connections with and block off aid to until your government steps down. It's a way of encouraging a government to step down or to show its people that it doesn't care about them. And I think that's what the result is. Because if Israel
block all of them.
So one, it's not all. Sweden has been sending relief to Hamas for a number of years, and most of the time it gets through. It's not all.
No one can get through now.
Correct. Well,
Egypt has said that they will allow people once the hostages are released. And granted, the hostages should be released. However, so many more people are dying.
Right.
Other than the hostages. It's now not Hamas holding hostages. It's Israel, Egypt, these other state actors are now causing more harm than good by, refusing to give in to Hamas's demands.
Okay, but it's because they're trying to say, Hamas, if you were democratically elected, your whole argument that you're in charge is because you're doing what's best for your people, but you're murdering people outside of it. So we're going to cut you off until you start acting in your people's actual best interests. And when as a way to encourage Hamas to actually do the right thing, and as a way to show people, hey, your government is going to tell you right now whether or not they actually care about you. And Hamas they don't. Hamas views all the people living in the Gaza Strip as hostages to hide behind.
Yeah, they're
you can't tell me,
but
right? But you
Hamas is not a government. They are in a governmental. They're in a governmental position, but they're first and foremost they're terrorists.
Yes,
and they have an agenda to see to.
Right, and so, for example, so Israel said, "Hey, we're going to bomb the ever-living crap out of you, so get out." And people tried to leave, but Hamas wouldn't let them leave.
Also, Israel would not let them leave.
No,
Israel did no favors.
Where did you see that? Because from what I've seen, video of Palestinian refugees leaving.
Okay, you've seen video of a couple hundred leaving.
Let me Google it.
That's not a whole lot.
I'm Googling it. Okay, so I have Googled, is Israel preventing refugees from Gaza? And I'm not seeing anything other than Israel has sealed off entry to the Gaza Strip, which means the only access is through Egypt.
Right. And Egypt has also denied, at least as of, I think, yesterday, Egypt has said they are not letting anyone in or out until the situation with the hostages is resolved.
So it looks like there are people. It does look like people are having trouble leaving.
I think what Israel has done is made it incredibly inconvenient. They have officially allowed people to leave, but they've made it incredibly inconvenient and, more or less impossible. Under the guise of them punishing Hamas, when really who they're trying to punish are the Palestinian people. And I think my overall point is you do not get to form a government of considerable amount of, basically relocate a population who has no right to this land. You don't get to relocate them to a place where people already live and then completely ignore the people who already live there and subjugate them for half a century and expect no pushback. And I think that the US is at this point propping them up to save face, to save ourselves from embarrassment, because we've propped them up for so long that we're turning a blind eye to any wrongdoing that Israel does at the expense of Palestinian people.
All right, so there's a lot to unpack there. First, I want to give an update on my Googling. So it looks like people are not fleeing to Israel. So I was wrong there. I will admit that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not because Israel's not letting them through. It's because that's where the fighting is. And so it's not a feasible place to evacuate to. So they're going to the southern half of the strip.
Yes. Which is where Israel told them to go. And they gave them, quote unquote, fair warning before they launched their counteroffensive. But it is also true that
Hamas is preventing them from leaving there, from evacuating. They're keeping them there. And I mean, Hamas has a history of using its citizens as body shields.
Yes, because they're a terrorist organization. Yep. I don't think that's an effective tactic by Hamas because I don't think Israel cares about civilian casualties, at least not Palestinian ones.
Well, I mean, at some point, push comes to shove in every war. And whether you're using civilians as body shields or not, something's going to end up happening.
I think push comes to shove. That's a very apt phrase to use because there is no denying that Palestine has been underserved by the current, by the Israeli government since the Israeli government's inception.
Sure.
Sorry, I'm opening up another beverage.
See, but here's the thing.
Stay hydrated.
That doesn't hydrate you, because I can.
It does.
The listeners don't necessarily know what you're drinking, but I do.
Oh, good old pub beer by 10 Barrel Brewing.
Yeah, alcohol dehydrates you, my guy. Anyway,
if you just hydrate in between, it doesn't matter.
Oh my gosh, it does. But anyway, oh my gosh, I lost my train of thought now.
Just look at how clear the skin is. Does this not look like the well hydrated face of? Actually, you know what? You may have a point.
Anyway, I feel like, historically speaking, there's always been instances in wars where one side is using civilians as body shields, and the other side tries to get around it as much as they can, but it eventually comes to there's got to be something done, and they have to blow through, mow over. And in this case, Hamas is doing that, and I think trying to paint Israel as war criminals for it. And I'm seeing a lot of that, especially from leftist media
But
saying,
Israel is also committing a lot of war crimes.
but they're specifically using this attack on Hamas, where there are civilian casualties involved, as committing war crimes, specifically because
Right.
the Gaza Strip has a high child population. Like 48% of the Gaza Strip
right.
is children.
But Hamas is a terrorist organization. Israel is a nation that is subject to the treaties that they sign that prohibit against war crimes. So
But
I don't want to say like I'm giving Hamas a pass, but it's like, yeah, they're a terrorist organization.
you're saying that
Israel, the
Israel should be
ones
held
that,
to a higher standard.
or at least held to a higher standard, if not within, the international court, the Hague, whatever whatever jurisdiction there is. We also don't need to be funding them, because Israel and our own state representatives have said Israel is perfectly capable of handling this on their own. Israel
Okay.
has one of the most advanced militaries in the world. They have some of the best training, particularly within special forces and special operations. They can handle this on their own.
If
We
it's
do
just
not
the
need
Gaza
to be.
Strip,
No,
yes.
well, that's from my understanding of what the comments were made by at least our state officials. It was under the context of Israel could take care of this as of right now, given their resources that they're utilizing elsewhere. They could handle this on their own. And
Yeah, but
yet
you see,
we're giving
Syria,
them aid.
Jordan, Lebanon, Iran,
But
Iraq,
that's
those
but that's
countries get
after but that's
involved.
after you bring those into account.
I don't think so. Just the sheer
That's
numbers game is
that is
gonna.
what our state says, what our State Department says.
Well, just if they say it and doesn't mean it's true, And I'm not gonna sit here and say that I agree that we should fund Israel, out the wazoo. And I would say that I see a lot of people in the media saying that any criticism of Israel is anti-Semitism, and I
It's
don't
not.
believe that.
It's absolutely not.
I can't believe I'm going to say that I agree with Bernie Sanders here, but he says you can criticize the Israeli government and not be criticizing Israel.
Yes.
Right? It's one thing
Absolutely.
to criticize the people, it's another to criticize what he called a far-right government. And I don't know enough about their government structure to say whether or not I agree with that label.
Yeah.
But I think he makes a good point there, where it just
I
because you're saying they're not doing the right thing doesn't mean you're being an anti-Semite.
I would agree, and I just want to make it clear. I don't necessarily disagree with the concept of Israel. I have since I was very young, I have been very interested in the history of the Holocaust and the ramifications of that, which led to the state of Israel, and so I am sympathetic to that. I very much I very much disagree with the manner with which they have conducted themselves within the last 50 years, while also being understanding of why they have done that. It's like I said, it's important to separate Hamas and Hezbollah from Palestine.
Right.
I in no way condone Hamas's action or Hezbollah's action. But I am somewhat sympathetic to the, average Palestinian citizen who just wants to continue to live on the land that, their family for generations has lived on. And I think it's, somewhat analogous to conversations about, indigenous land in America, elsewhere in the world. But it seems to me that Israel is targeting Palestinians and not
Sure.
Hamas.
So let me ask you a question, because I agree with all that, and I want to go back to the war crimes thing just for half a second. If we're going to accuse Israel of committing war crimes because they are attacking Gaza, which is filled majority with civilians, half of which are children, who are, I think we've agreed, being used as body shields, or as you said, poker chips as well, to protect the terrorist organization, if Israel does go in and does invade or attack or bomb or whatever, and we're going to call that war crimes, what would you label? Hold on.
Well, I don't think that just going into Gaza is a war crime. It's
You're
the
right.
method
So,
with which they're withholding vital resources and
sure.
giving absolutely no quarter to the citizens, the refugees.
Okay.
That I think are, reminiscent at the very least of war crimes.
So what then would you call dropping the atomic bombs on Japan?
A war crime.
You think so?
Yeah, absolutely. But even more destructive than the atomic bombs are the fire bombings that we did, which are absolutely war crimes. Oh no, fire bombings in Japan. Oh. So much more destructive, so many more human casualties than either the Hiroshima or the Nagasaki bomb. Hiroshima was, I think, more deadly because it was less, they were made less aware of it.
No, they were given the same amount of awareness.
Well, but by the time that Nagasaki happened, people were like, oh,
right. They had heard about it, and so they're like, we got to get out of Dodge.
Yeah, they were getting out of areas of population. But
yeah, we actually dropped pamphlets over like 15 or 20 cities.
Right.
So no one knew which one was going to get hit.
But it was a crime to read any of those pamphlets. So
but was that a United States decision or a Japan decision?
No, it was a crime by the Japanese Empire to read any form of propaganda. So if you were caught reading any of those pamphlets, you would have been thrown in jail. And in fact, there were several known cases of people who tried to warn people before the Hiroshima bombing itself because of these pamphlets that the Americans dropped, but were punished because of that.
So I guess what I'm trying
either way, the dropping of the atomic bombs, or I think more so the fire bombings that we did, absolutely war crimes.
Okay. All right. I can see your logic there. I'm not going to... It's always hard for me when I talk about this with my students, because I bring up this as a debate. Was it right to drop the bombs or not? Because we did warn them, but you're right. It was a crime. You're right. So is just whether or not it's a war crime or whether or not it was the right decision are two different questions. You're absolutely right. Because
it's not one that I think I can answer. I think in hindsight, it's very, very easy to say, yes, it was the right decision to drop, at least.
Well, you're looking at millions of lives over multiple years versus a few, several 100,000 lives in a couple of days.
Right. But also, in hindsight, we have the knowledge that the Japanese were already planning to surrender by the time that Hiroshima was dropped. So we didn't know that then.
Yeah. But what I'm trying to get at is war is terrible. It's hell,
Yeah.
And there's, no matter how you slice it, nobody comes out on top in war.
Right.
I mean, someone wins, but that doesn't mean you're coming out on top. And civilians always are involved one way or another. And so it's not a game of how can we not have civilian casualties, it's how can we limit it. And I think by trying to give them time to evacuate and give them notice to evacuate, that shifts the guilt of those people, those people's deaths, to the people preventing them from leaving.
Okay. I can see that. And I would somewhat agree, but I think when you have a military force the way that Israel does, which particularly does well with clandestine special operations, a more surgical approach is feasible and appropriate. And
I think if it were feasible, they would have done it by now.
I don't think so. I think that goes to speak to the ethnic cleansing motivation that I think is kind of underlying a lot of this. I think that Benjamin Netanyahu is very much a nationalist.
Yeah.
And is making decisions at the expense of people that are ostensibly under his care and his jurisdiction, that I don't agree with, and that I think are detrimental and cruel, and end up costing a lot of civilian casualties where there don't need to be. Now, that is not to say that Hamas's hands are clean.
Sure.
I think, obviously Hamas, again, it's a terrorist organization. I'm not going to condone a terrorist organization. Their entire point of existence is to inflict terror.
Well, Hamas, in their organizing charter or whatever they had from their founding, have called for
their mission statement,
right?
The destruction of Israel,
not just the destruction of Israel, but the eradication of all Jewish people.
Right. But again, they're a terrorist organization. That's kind of a given that they're going to be shitty. Israel is a state.
That's true.
And
no one's been sitting around like, oh man, those Al Qaeda, they're good guys, they're just misguided. Yeah. No one's sitting around saying that. That's a good point.
There might be some people, but not that I would care to chat with. But Israel is a state. It's a state that has agreed to certain treaties and regulations and international law. And it's a state that we give so much money to and military support to, who have a well-functioning military of their own. And I think more that's my problem, is that, regardless of who is wrong, who is right, we are providing so much assistance to a nation who is violating its treaties, committing war crimes, and who is not in alignment with what I thought our ideals were.
So,
as a nation, not as a state, as a nation.
Here's what I would say. Historically speaking, in any war, both sides commit war crimes.
Yeah.
Both sides. I mean, the United States used shotguns in trenches, which at the time was a war crime.
Yeah, or enhanced interrogation techniques. That was a fancy name for torture right. that we used in Guantanamo. That was absolutely a war crime.
Yeah, and there's American soldiers in World War II who would take trophies, some of which ranged from toes of dead enemies to, I read a book where it talked about a couple of guys who took skulls and cleaned them up and used them to drink out of at their
work God,
office.
I mean, the My Lai massacre, I don't think there was a single prosecution from that.
Right.
And that was, plain and simple, just a horrific abuse of power. And,
So what I'm trying to say then is sometimes it's hard to keep control over soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's because people have power and they get corrupted with it and they make terrible, evil decisions. And sometimes it's because it's the only feasible way to fight back against someone who's committing way worse and way more war crimes than you.
I don't think we've hit that point. That's the thing, is they're using those tactics, and I don't think we've hit that point.
And I'm not going to say I know either way. I'm not going to pretend to know enough about the situation to make that call. But it's what I'm trying to say is, in a war, everybody commits war crimes. The difference is whether or not you're the winner. Which, how many Americans were prosecuted for their war crimes in World War II or Vietnam?
That's fair. Yeah. Certainly not the ones that created the Japanese internment camps.
Thank you, good old FDR. Can't believe we tried to put him on our money.
Yeah. I still think overall a very effective president.
We'll have to have that another discussion, another episode. I
think we did several episodes ago.
I cannot stand FDR or the amount of confidence. No, positive feedback. I don't know what the way that we reminisce
hubris.
About the hubris. No, I don't like how people think he's this amazing guy, and he wasn't. He censored all of American media so that no one would know he was in a wheelchair.
Well, yeah. He had a panel added to his desk to hide that as well.
Right. Whereas if Trump was in a wheelchair and tried to get people to censor, tried to censor the media to say, oh, he's not in a wheelchair, we'd go crazy on him.
Well, I think that speaks more to the age of technology that we live in.
There's a lot to it, but either way, I just don't get me started on FDR. Let's talk about the Speaker of the House.
Yeah, I was gonna say let's move on to our second topic, which I don't have a whole lot to say about except that I think it's fascinating. I'm not surprised at all.
Yeah, I think even Representative McCarthy knew that this was coming.
Congressperson.
Right. He knew when he made that deal.
I don't want to assume his pronouns.
He's a Republican.
Oh no, his pronouns. So congressman, congressperson.
I know what you're saying. I'm saying he's a Republican. If there's anyone in Congress who you could safely assume the pronouns for, it would be him.
Right.
Okay. No, but I think he knew going into that budget meeting that
what
had to happen, and
George Santos. George Santos is a Republican, and honestly, couldn't tell you.
No, I think George Santos is a quote-unquote Republican. He's a Republican to get elected. I don't think he's actually one.
Right.
He's whatever.
As far as his pronouns, though, moment. Yeah, whatever he wants. Anyway, I'm sorry.
I didn't mean to say about that, but I'm not going to. Let's get back to the Speaker of the House. Let's stay on topic. We could have that discussion another day too, because
Oh, he's also popping back up in the zeitgeist.
Oh, not just George Santos, but the whole he can be whatever he wants to be. Postmodernist identity is whatever I want it to be kind of a thing.
Okay. Let's get back to Speaker.
Because I will respect anything anybody wants to identify as and be called as. But I also think sometimes we take this postmodernist, my truth is relative just to me, way too far. Postmodernist idea that there is no absolute truth. I think we go way, way too far with that.
I don't think it goes that deep.
It totally does.
I don't think it does.
But we can talk about that another day. So speaking of the House,
this is a topic for another time.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting as a historian and as a history teacher that this happened, because it is the first time in American history that we have ousted a speaker.
Well, and on the wake of a couple other firsts in American history, first president to be impeached twice, the first attack. Well, maybe not the first, but the first attack I think since was it the War of 1812 on the U.S. Capitol? Because I'm pretty sure even during the Civil War, it wasn't.
Civil War didn't make it to D.C. Yeah, the South didn't make it to D.C., but they got
Richmond
close-ish.
was about as far north as I think we got, but I think it was the War of 1812 was the last time that the grounds of the Capitol were breached by a hostile force. And that's just me going off my memory. I don't know.
You're
if that's
right
accurate.
In the sense that it's the first time that the Capitol was breached by any force.
Yeah.
But I would hesitate to use the words hostile, because to me, hostile is like, we're going to try and take over, and they were more seeing it as defensive.
They were.
I think you have to take their
the January
6th
people were going for. They went in there chanting, "Hang Mike Pence." They were hostile.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. All right.
They were hostile.
But I think that's too hasty a term.
I don't think it is for the January 6th
the entire thing.
Insurrectionists. They were a hostile force. They were there to cause harm.
I don't think they were there to cause harm.
They were there to cause Camron. We've seen the footage of the barricades being used to beat policemen. We've heard the testimonies of Capitol officials. We've read their texts where they are planning the planting of pipe bombs and seen the videos of them going through elected members' files in the galleries where they're like, oh, this we need to use this as evidence so that we can lynch them.
So a lot of those threats and a lot of those things were also found to not be credible. Just because you say something doesn't mean it's a credible threat. So
okay, but
but
when I see somebody putting a highway barrier up against a police officer's head, or I hear them say chanting hang Mike Pence, that's credible.
I think you're right in that it is credible when you see them actually beating people, but I don't think their express intent in showing up was to cause harm. I think it was
it's because they got whipped up into a frenzy
Right.
by the words of the then sitting president, who is now on trial for those crimes, and those are not looking good. That's for a different episode.
That's fair. And I'm not going to say that I think the insurrectionists were right. I just think a lot of people cut the insurrectionists' point of view of themselves out quite a bit. And
Sure.
I think, historically speaking,
I don't think the
need to look at
intent
the full
was
picture.
to be insurrectionists.
Right.
But I do think they got very carried away.
I would agree with that. That I would wholeheartedly agree with that wording of it.
Yeah.
But anyway, so these are a whole lot. We keep getting distracted. This is a whole lot of firsts in the United States history, right? So we have the insurrection. We have two impeachments.
I think it's going to show that this is a new time in American politics, is kind of what I was getting at with, this is the
I agree.
The
and
most
I think
recent first in a lot of firsts.
I think it's a turn. And I don't think it's a good turn. I
don't either.
When you look at previous, for lack of a better term, empires, right? Because, we technically are. We have multiple nations that are under our purview, under our control.
I think given the context that I think you're using it, I would agree with the term empire.
Yeah. So given, or political superpowers, you could also say.
Global power.
Each one falls in a similar pattern, and it's usually within 100 to 200 year cycles of their power. And I think the United States is different because we are the first global superpower to go through this in such an interconnected, globalized world. The last major superpower to really rise up and fall apart in this way was the Soviet Union.
Okay.
And even then, that was before we really had the internet constantly connecting everything. That's before we had trade and commerce so widely spread as it is now.
I would say the Ottoman Empire, though, because the Soviet Union wasn't around for that long, and they were our contemporary. I would say the last empire that we've seen kind of break up or see the same path with the trajectory that we have, I would say would be the Ottoman Empire, or the Austro-Hungarian Empire as an offshoot of that.
I would say Ottoman Empire. I would maybe say the British Empire.
But the British Empire didn't break up. It just kind of wasted away into
It totally
obscurity.
broke up. Do you know how many different countries literally revolted and broke off?
Right, but it didn't cause the entire downfall.
That's true. And then
the British Empire away. Or the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth is still alive and well today.
Yeah, well,
ceremonially, but it was a peaceful transition. Well, for the states that remain a part of the Commonwealth, it was a more or less peaceful transition of power.
Yeah, because there wasn't any energy left the British had to give to fight them.
That's what I'm saying. I think there's plenty of energy within America. I think America's a powder keg. The last time we've seen a powder keg, the likes of which has been probably the Ottoman Empire.
I think there's a lot of energy within the American people. I don't know if there's a lot of energy within the American government. And
no, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and so I could see your Ottoman Empire comparison because of that. I would also make that comparison to the Soviet Union. I feel like the Soviet Union government just kind of got run down. We literally outspent them until they couldn't do anything anymore.
Would you say maybe instead of like meeting in the middle between the Ottoman Empire and the USSR, maybe the Russian Empire?
Yeah, you could also say the Russian Empire.
Maybe we are more likely headed to a Bolshevik revolution, where it's a rebelling against the autocracy that we feel subjugated by.
Yeah, I would say it's more like a Bolshevik or French Revolution that we're headed towards. I don't know that we're going to see a whole lot of beheading. I think it would be more political than it would be that. Though it is notable that we do have a number of rightist people who would love to eradicate members of government. And those people are, this is one of my problems that I have with the political spectrum today. Those people are rightly condemned for that belief.
Right.
But then you have leftists who say the same thing under the guise of eat the rich and literally call for the killing and extermination of politicians. And they're not condemned, they're not joined in with, but they're just kind of, we ignore them. Whereas everyone's those rightists are terrible.
But I hear a lot more people, just average, everyday people who happen to be on the far right, not even the quote-unquote far right, but just the right.
But why? Why do you think that is? How much media is leftist controlled versus rightist controlled?
I think it has a lot to do with the message that the right media is setting, that the average person on the right is more apt, at least from my point of view, is more apt to be in favor of those kinds of violent revolutions.
I disagree.
Than I mean, the phrase "eat the rich" to me does not mean a violent revolution. It means, really what it means is it's a more polite way of saying "fuck the rich," which nobody thinks. I mean, and forgive my French here, but no one thinks when I say "fuck the rich" that I actually want to fuck the rich. Right?
Now I gotta break out the censor beep.
I know, I'm sorry, but I felt like
no, you make a good point. You make a good point, and that's a good way of phrasing it. And in that comparison, I think you're right in the sense of that's how it is generally accepted to be.
Mm-hmm.
But you still have that small population on the left.
Certainly,
that
you have
which
those
I
populations
think is the
in
same
both.
Size. Right? I think they're the same size. I
don't think they're the same size.
I think they are.
That's where we disagree.
Here's the thing. I think they are both a minor amount of each party. I think they are a negligible amount of each party.
I will agree with that. But
I think that the rightists get away with less because they want to do the same thing for different reasons. And that difference in ideology in a world where the left controls 80% or more of the major media, you're going to hear about those people way more. And it also just so happens that they tend to be more armed and therefore a little bit louder. I think they're the same amount
I don't think that's
size.
The case.
Oh, well, what do you mean? You think the left side is also armed?
Actually, yes.
Okay.
I think that the left is not as well armed, but I think that the people that actually are armed and not more of a danger to themselves than they are to like everyone else. Like I think that the right is more well armed, but the majority of the people on the right who are armed, the only person that they're endangering killing is really themselves or other people, of their ilk. I think of the people that would actually be able to effectively use weapons on either side is about the same. I think that the people on the left are much less vocal about it.
Sure.
Because we're not so worried about our masculinity or whatever it is. I had a larger point that I was building to at that. But to what you were saying, I mean, of course these people exist on each side. But I think that the rhetoric is certainly fueled by the media, and the left does control more of the media, the mainstream media, and the messages that go out. But the rhetoric that you're seeing from the right is much more volatile. And so it's more of a, quality versus quantity kind of an argument.
I don't know, because
the left has quantity, but the quality in terms of the viciousness of that rhetoric definitely goes to the right.
I don't know that I agree with that, just because when I think historically,
I don't know of any household names like Alex Jones or Ben Shapiro or Glenn Beck back in the day. I don't know of any household names that are on the left that are also so vilified
Rachel
in terms
Maddow.
of their... Rachel Maddow is the one single name. Anderson Cooper is not a political...
He has become significantly more... At least I'm not saying I agree with the label. I'm not saying I agree with the label, but most of the people at CNN, most of the people at MSNBC, most of the people at CBS...
See, I'll give you Rachel Maddow. I can't see it being done with Anderson Cooper. I can't see it really being done with anyone else.
I'm not saying I agree with it, but it is... He is being given that label.
Wow. But do you really think that Anderson Cooper is up to the level of Bill O'Reilly, Tucker Carlson?
Well, and let's be clear. I would not put Alex Jones in the same boat as Ben Shapiro.
Okay, yeah,
I would put him in his own boat. I would put Bill O'Reilly and Tucker Carlson and Rush Limbaugh in their own boat, and I would put
I would put Candace Owens in that same boat. Ben Shapiro, I would not. Candace Owens, yes, I would.
Because I'm not a big Ben Shapiro fan, just because I feel like he has his own biases and he's not scared to let them show, and I think that's fine if that's.
And he also doesn't need to wear high heels to seem tall next to his wife.
But
that's a throwback to our earlier episode.
Yeah, I will say that I appreciate that in the limited amount I have listened to him, he does try to criticize the right just as much as he does the left. I'm not saying he's good at it. I'm not saying that his criticisms of the right are always as strong as his criticisms of the left, but he does try to do it.
I think he throws a bone to the people that think that they're moderate.
You could easily make that argument. I think there is a lot of merit to it. I'm not saying I don't listen to him. My wife does. My wife loves him. That's her prerogative. That's fine. She's even got a leftist tears mug.
Oh God! Yeah, I've seen that when we were playing D&D together.
Yeah. I actually got it for her for Christmas, but that's something that she's into. She loves
Speaker of the House.
Yeah, Speaker of the House. The reason we're talking about all this, I guess, let's get it back. You're right. The reason we're talking about all this is because this is, I think, the Speaker of House being ousted is a big turning point for the United States as a downturn. Because you look at all these people, all these countries that we got distracted talking about, like the Soviet Union, the Ottoman Empire, the Roman Empire even. It always boiled down to
internal division.
Internal division regulated by a weak government.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I think we have a weak government now, and I think we have since Obama left office.
I think we have an incredibly divided government.
Again, I would say that since the last maybe couple of years of Obama, and I'm not blaming him for that. I'm blaming the political climate of the time.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
But I think you're right. We have a very political divided government, but it's ineffectual. It's weak. Even when they do agree on things, it doesn't work very well.
Mm-hmm.
There's a general distrust of the federal government right now among both parties. There's a general distrust of what they have to say, their ability to accomplish things, how they spend our money, and our confidence in their ability to make change, to actually get things done.
Well, and do you also, this is just maybe a thought that I had randomly, but I do feel like because you and I were talking about in a previous episode about our willingness to believe that our candidates were, genuine, or that they were there for the right reasons. And I could not help but think about how much more I feel like that is true since the Citizens United case, which made it so that funding on election campaigns is basically unhindered. You can bring in as much money as you want through various means to fund your election campaign, which has basically made us even more so of an autocracy than we had been before that. And I feel like with that has come along, at least for me, a sense of distrust with my politicians. And I feel like that is also kind of fed into the division, because the people that are now running for office are not running because they have the best ideas. They're running because they got the most financial support. And in order to stay in that job, they're going to have to continue to get financial support. And so the things that they're arguing on are not their well-founded, deeply held beliefs, but rather what is most politically and financially expedient.
Well, and love him or hate him, Trump, when he was running against Hillary...
Guess which one I do.
When he was running against Hillary, said in that debate, someone said, what do you have to say about the allegations that you've taken advantage of tax loopholes? And he said, I absolutely did it. And I would do it again.
Yeah.
And he goes,
he said that in his trial when it was an incriminating thing for him to say.
Right. But he pointed out and said, but I do it because that's what all of us do. That's what all of her funders do. And that's why she hasn't closed these loopholes, because even though she's had the power to, because if she closed those loopholes, she loses all that funding from all of her friends. So I think what you're saying is exactly right. And I think it's affecting us on both sides. And when we look at previous countries who have had a similar problem, where it becomes very autocratic, very business oriented, more than politically oriented, one of two things happens. Either the government fixes itself because of some democratic election, which you could argue is what happened with the United States in the 1960s, when we had a lot of political division then, and we voted more for people that more people could get behind, with Kennedy.
Okay.
Or
I think that's a stretch, but
I think you're right. It's a stretch, but I think it's the closest thing that we have in United States history.
Okay.
I guess you could argue Britain giving up their direct control over countries, doing that themselves, right? They weren't necessarily always asked to give up that direct control. They started to volunteer it after a lot of things went wrong. So I think either we're going to see a big shift in how people vote, and we're going to drive out a lot of these old people, or the other option that I see historically happening is we have some kind of a reset. And that could be where we have a revolution. That could be where there's like another civil war. It could be we just have a big political steamroller that moves with the young people and we kick everybody out of office.
I think it's going to be somewhat like, not the French Revolution of, I think it was like
the Reign of Terror with Robespierre.
Yeah, not like that one that was like 1780s.
Yeah, with all the head chopping.
Yeah, I think it's going to be more like the less violent and bloody ones that happened, a few decades later. And I'm not totally well versed on that, but from what I understand, they were
bloody
more
and violent. They were just as bloody and violent.
Maybe not.
It just happened under the guise of a military intervention, so it's not seen to be as bloody or violent, but it definitely was. Napoleon came in and restored order, and it was very bloody and violent.
Well, I'm talking about the ones that happened after Napoleon.
After Napoleon? Oh my gosh, yeah, I don't know much about those ones.
I think that we're definitely going to see a sea change.
Yeah.
For the better or worse, though. I cannot tell you which way it's going to go.
I would like to see it change in the in the way that we start.
I'd like to see it change for the better. I mean, given the two,
yeah, for the better. But
I would like
specifically,
to see it change for the better.
Screw you. You know what I mean. No, I would like to see it change.
You heard it here, folks. Camron wants it to change for the worst.
I would like to see more of a push away from the two-party system and into third parties.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I would love for more diverse representation of ideas.
Right. I think that would be the best solution, but
that's never going to happen in America.
I mean, I think it could happen. It's going to happen more with the younger generation than it is with the older generation.
I think we're stuck in our bicameral party system.
I think we're like the Israelites wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. I think we've got a young generation that is disillusioned by both Republicans and Democrats, and that's why they're not voting. Gen Z has terrible voter turnout, even though young people traditionally have a specific voter turnout towards the left.
Right, but that is also what gained Trump his presidency in 2016. Specifically, a group of silent white young men who turned out in numbers to vote that we had never seen before.
Sure.
And that's actually what tipped the scales by a lot of pollsters.
I think we're going to see a lot more of that, as Gen Z
from
and Gen
different
Alpha.
demographics, though, not just that specific demographic.
Right. Yeah, you're right. And I think as Gen Z and Gen Alpha get more of their political bearings, you get more of their political voices.
Is that what the new generation is called?
Uh-huh.
Oh, I had never heard that.
Yeah.
Gen Alpha?
Yep. I think as they start to kind of get more politically active, we're going to see less of a Democratic push. I think the Democrat Party is going to lose.
I think it's going to be less stratified, if nothing else.
And I think the Republican Party is likewise going to lose a good amount of clout.
I think this is the breaking up of the Republican Party. The Republican Party can't. I mean, bring it back to our initial conversation about Kevin McCarthy and the speakership. Kevin McCarthy fought tooth and nail to get that position in the first place.
I think we're just going to see a lot of them become a nationalist party of some kind.
Yeah. Well, and I think, like we've, again, already talked about on previous episodes, I think that nationalist sect is going to take the Republican Party name with them. And right now what we're seeing, or what we're about to see, is a fractory group of actual Republicans who have to rebrand themselves to get away from that party name that's being sullied by people like Matt Gaetz, Jenny McCarthy, and or not Jenny McCarthy. Why did I say Jenny McCarthy? Marjorie Taylor Greene is what I meant.
I think likewise, though,
I was just thinking of crazy vaccine deniers, and I thought of Jenny McCarthy.
I think likewise, though, we're going to see a similar fracturing in the Democratic Party, because we're starting to get to the point. I think we are starting to get to the point where you have a lot of Democrats who are leaving the Democratic Party because it's getting too progressive, too liberal. Look at people like Bill Maher, who was the leading bleeding heart leftist when we were in high school, and is now, if anything, a moderate, even though he hasn't really changed his position on anything.
Yeah, but Bill Maher for me has always just been on his own team. I don't think he's representative. But
it's not just Bill Maher. I mean,
Democrats.
look at Bernie Sanders. Okay, Bernie Sanders runs as a Democrat until he's in office, and then he switches to an independent. He does that all the time.
No, that's political maneuvering. I think what you're going to see. I think what you're going to see with the Democratic Party is these old school Democrats are going to die out. And we're now seeing a new wave of quote unquote progressives, which I know is like a thing that Nancy Pelosi termed.
Actually, no, it's an FDR. It's a Woodrow Wilson term.
Well,
it goes way back.
Not termed, but Nancy Pelosi in the modern sense has championed that.
Okay.
I think you're going to see people like AOC, people like the guy that's like huge on TikTok. I forget his name.
He's I would disagree there, because he is very sensible. He represents what I think one side of the Democratic Party will be, where it's very sensible, logical, down to earth. Let's try and get stuff done. And then you've got the visionary side of the Democratic Party, which is your AOC, your Tlaib, your Bernie Sanders. And I think those, just like I'm seeing, and I think you're right that the Republican Party is kind of breaking up. I think the difference is, though, the Democratic Party...
You're just seeing a shift in the Democratic Party. It's not going to break up.
I think it's breaking up more silently because you have a number... it's becoming more and more stratified. I think it's happening more quietly because even though they have very different views, the far leftist people, the progressive people who are calling straight up for a socialist state or a communist state...
I'm not necessarily not one of them.
But I would say those people are just as far to the left as some of these people are to the right on the other side.
I disagree with that. I disagree with that wholeheartedly.
Well, okay. Well, as someone who has their master's degree in communist history, I'm going to say
I think I'm about as far of a leftist as you can be without being clinically insane. And I don't have anything close to the violent values that I've found with people who are not that far right.
I don't think you are as far left as you think you are. Because there's a difference between saying, I think socialism, communism would be great, and then the actual implementation of it. And that's something for a very different time.
But I'm also not championing the things that the people that on the far right are championing. There's no one on the far left that is championing things that are as detrimental as the far right nationalists are championing.
Communism.
No one on the far. Okay, that's not the same as ethnic cleansing, as lynching.
That's fair. But when I'm looking at the far right, I'm not looking at those people. I'm looking at people like Matt Gaetz. Matt Gaetz is not calling for ethnic cleansing like the neo-Nazis are.
Gaetz far right.
Oh, well, I would. But I would say...
I would call people like Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene, who are strong proponents of nationalism, which nationalism is in itself racism. I don't think you're seeing the same things on the left.
Ugh. We're going to have to talk about this next week because we are, one, out of time, and two,
we are.
I heavily disagree with that definition of nationalism.
Okay.
Vehemently.
I think it very much invites racism.
I would agree with that. But nationalism to me is just the sense of identity. And when you have nationalism in the sense of there's us and there's them, which is at the base level what nationalism is. You have a group of us and a group of others. And we include
How do you
the
define the us
right.
and separate the others? Though?
Exactly.
Primarily, that's done through race.
Sometimes.
Most of the time.
Not most of the time.
I would challenge you. Okay, next episode, bring me 3 instances in history where nationalism has not been brought about through the means of racism.
Okay. Do I get to count all of the different communist states as one, or do I have to count them or can I count them individually?
If they're part of the USSR, they count as the USSR.
Okay. All of the USSR, China, Cambodia, Vietnam.
Wait,
Cuba
are not using race?
Right.
So you're saying that Khmer Rouge were not at all using race?
No. I'm saying their revolution was not, or their nationalist ideals were more class-based as well as race.
I am going to disagree with that.
I'm not saying they didn't bring race into it. I'm not saying race wasn't involved, but you look at any communist revolution and it is a nationalist idea of us versus them, where the us are the working class and the them are the bourgeoisie.
Okay, maybe this is an episode that we need to come back to. All right, our thoughts on nationalism, because I find this very fascinating what you are saying, but we do not have time to continue.
We don't,
to
and I do want to be clear. I am not a nationalist in this.
No, I don't
sense
think
for
you
today.
do. I know
you don't think that. I want other people listening to be like, "Is he some far righty?" I'm not.
No. Okay, well, thank you. First of all, to all of our listeners, please, if you enjoy what we're doing, or if you just enjoy us, and would like to support us, please like, subscribe, do all that fun stuff on Spotify, YouTube, wherever you find us. Also, thank you to House Young Club for letting us use their song "This Life Is Tough But Fair" as our intro and outro music. You can find that on their EP Headset Emotions. And Cameron, I believe you have a fun fact for us.
Well, first I want to shout out my wife, who told me that I would be recording for way longer than I told her I would, as I do every week. And she was right.
Was she correct?
She was. She was quite correct. So shout out to Alyssa for being correct again. And
yes, thank you, Alyssa.
I am sorry for going this long as I did.
I'm not sorry.
Our fun fact for the week is that I want all of you to remember that the Empire State Building has its own zip code.
Does it really?
It does.
I did not know that. I wish I had known that when I was there. It is quite a large building, but I didn't realize it had its own
one building
zip
has
code.
Its own zip code. That's
that
crazy.
Reminds me of your mom joke.